Let's go, break it down, put it there, bring it on, step it up, right there, break it down, put it there, here we go, step it up, bring it on, let's go,
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this now fully online program, Board Games, More Than Just Monopoly, organized jointly by the Student Association Knights of the Kitchen Table and Studium Generale Eindhoven. Now, I mentioned fully online because this was originally planned to be both an offline and online program, but unfortunately, due to the recent tightening of the corona measures, we have been forced back online. But it's not the end of the world because even though it might feel a bit counterintuitive to talk about board games online, because board games are such a physical, a social event, there are now also, fortunately, a lot of online alternatives. Now, my name is Marle de Jonge. I work for Studium Generale, and I am your host for tonight. I'm going straight to my own favorite game, and this was my favorite game when I was a child, I should add. Perhaps some of you know it. It's called Mousetrap. And it was a game where throughout the game, you had to collect all these intricate mechanics to eventually catch the mouse in the little basket. It's still out there, looking slightly more modern than this older version. So a little tip for you there. Now, I mentioned that we're organizing this event together with the Knights. And I would like to introduce you to my fellow organizer, Tim Heiswolf. Tim, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Yes, hi. Tim, I'm showing a picture now of something that can only be described as a very full cupboard.
Yeah.
Can you describe a little bit what we're looking at?
Yeah, indeed. That's the cupboard of the Knights of the Kitchen Table. We are the largest, the best, but also the only board and role-playing game association here in Eindhoven, even in the Netherlands. Last time we counted, we had around 430 board games in that cupboard, or not in that
all
cupboard.
All in that one cupboard.
In our entire room, but we have plenty of board games and we play them regularly. And here today, I would like to tell with you why board games are very fun.
Yeah, so is your favorite game also among this many examples in the cupboard?
It's also in the cupboard, but I also got it here.
Okay.
It's Terraforming Mars. And as you might have guessed, you terraform Mars in it. But the thing that makes it really fun is that the VVD has taken over the entire world. So everything has been privatized, including Terraforming Mars. So all companies trying to terraform Mars while also increasing their own economy and profits and such. So that's a really fun game because you compete with your fellow players, but you're also kind of working together towards one goal of terraforming Mars. So cool. This is my favorite board game, but we're not going to be playing it tonight. It takes a bit long.
Okay, but good to know. Thanks, Tim. And could you maybe explain to us a little bit more about what inspired you to organize an event about board games tonight?
Yes, well, a lot of time when I talk to people about board games, I hear like, "Oh no, you only played it on New Year's Eve together with your mom and your dad, and it's boring. It's nobody really enjoys it." But I think differently. I enjoy it very much, as you can see, and as you can also see in the picture there. So I want to show people that board games are more than just Monopoly. That they can be very fun, very complex, and there are many different kinds.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're going to be hearing quite a lot more about that tonight. Thanks for now, Tim. We're going to be seeing you again at the end of the evening when you're going to introduce to us some online games that we can play. But we would also like to get to know you at home a little bit better as well. So you might have already guessed, for those of you who watch our programs more often, but we've prepared a few Mentimeter questions for you. It works as follows. If you take out your phone or use a different webpage and go to menti.com, you can use the code 17388, or you can use the direct link that is going to be provided in the chat. We're going to be seeing who we have in the audience tonight, whether you're all big game fanatics or you're just getting introduced to this topic or you don't really know what the fuzz is all about. These are all perfectly okay answers. Let's see what we have tonight. So the first question is, how often do you play board games? And I see a lot of you are answering already. So we have the options ranging from daily to never. And most of you play it at least once a month. We will wait a bit of time for everyone to reply. So we have 4 people currently that have never played a board game before. So an extra welcome to you. Very brave that you're entering this event with us. Okay, we move on to the next question. The next question, I'm sorry for the 4 of you who've never played. You can decide how to answer this or just skip this one. What kind of games do you typically play? So is it family games like Monopoly or Mens-erger-je-niet, which is called Ludo in English, party games, casual games, core games, or hardcore games? And if you're not exactly sure yet of what these terms imply, don't worry. Many of those items will be discussed later as well. I think you can also have multiple answers here if you like. So we have many people playing family games and party games. And we have 6 hardcore games. And I'm curious to see if you might be members of the Knights of the Kitchen Table already. Still some votes coming in. But we move on to the next slide. The next question is, who do you usually play board games with? Is it with your family, your friends? Do you have special board game buddies? Or do you usually play with strangers? That could be either online or, for example, in a game cafe, game shop. Okay, so friends is going in the lead. None of you playing with strangers, or you don't dare admit it. I see a few more responses coming in, but friends is the winner. Most of you are playing with friends. Okay. And our final question for this round, this is an open question. What is your all-time favorite game? Which I realize is difficult to answer on the spot, so you can also just mention a game that you really enjoy playing. I see Weerwolven. I've got that there behind me. Monopoly, Catan, Terraforming Mars. That's probably Tim. Magic, Pokemon, Minecraft, more Monopoly, Bonanza. Okay, Cards Against Humanity, more Terraforming Mars. Ticket to Ride, Catan, Weerwolven. Wow. We could have made a poll. Great. So also a lot of Monopoly fans. Ticket to Ride, Magic, Exploding Kittens. There you go. Okay, we have a very diverse crowd. That's great to see. And what we're going to be looking at tonight is a lot of different elements associated to board game playing. So the psyche behind it, the game mechanics, the game dynamics, how you come up with an idea to create your own game. And I think it's time to introduce our first speaker of tonight. It's Dr. Max Birk. He's from our very own Technical University in Eindhoven. Hi, Max. I see you already in
Hi, Male.
the live stream. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you. How are you?
Are you a board game yourself, Max? Board game
Yes, I do
yourself?
like playing board games. Yeah, I have quite a history of playing them, I guess. Yeah, I started early with like backgammon and then played Warhammer quite a bit. And then actually I competed in Canada in Settlers of Catan, actually on a provincial level, and almost made it. I went in second, but unfortunately we're not allowed to go to the countrywide ones. Yeah, but that was fun. Yeah.
That is your victory there.
Close, very close.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Let me introduce you a bit more. You're an assistant professor at the Department of Industrial Design at the TU Eindhoven. You have a very broad background in both psychology, computer science, and game design research. And Max uses many elements of this to study game design research, and also he studies the mental processes and design-induced behavioral change. And we've asked Max to, from his expertise, reflect on the current board game world of today. Board games have become very popular in current years, so he's going to tell us a little bit more about the whole background of that. So Max, a very warm welcome in this live stream, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marla. All right, I feel like I almost lost my introduction here, but maybe I'm gonna go a little bit more into detail. So actually I have a background in computer science at the University of Saskatchewan. It's kind of where I studied with a strong focus on games, and I studied psychology at the University of Trier and got quite a knack, like an interest in doing video games research actually, right? And then also doing research with video games, so using them as a digital context. Here at TV, I actually teach a course on design for games and play, focused on playful interactions. So we are actually designing playful objects using actuators and sensors. So that's a course. If you're still looking for something for Q3, hit me up. And I put up like a little slide here. I gave a talk in 2016, and it shows a little bit of my background and interest in games and playtesting, where I talked about technical solutions to crowdsource playtesting online. So in games research, like kind of matching the designer's intent and actually like the experience of the player is quite a challenge. And what I proposed there was like that we could use online crowdsourcing for doing so. Just to give you like a little bit more of kind of the background of the kind of work that I did or that I'm still doing. To continue on that line, like I published one paper on fostering intrinsic motivation through avatar identification in digital games. So the idea is that when we customize representations in gameplay, like in this case, I'm talking about game avatars, so you know those maybe from Mass Effects, that when we identify with those representations, that we are more motivated.
I'm sorry, I just have to interfere 1 second. The question is if you can share your slides again.
If I can share my slides again, yes, absolutely. I'm very happy to do so.
We were not seeing them.
Okay, yeah.
For a brief moment.
Mm-hmm. This will take a second, unfortunately.
We're not in a rush.
That's okay. I think I actually have to take the desktop. Sorry, this is always. Mm-hmm. Are we good now?
I think so. No, and then if you put them
we're actually not, right? Like you're seeing the.
If you can put them in presenter mode.
It's the same problem as before. Okay, I'm trying this again. Sharing screen. Try to. How's that?
Yeah, that looks great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Continue, Max. Thanks.
All right, absolutely. Yeah, so I guess I talked a little bit about identification and representations, and I'm going to come back to this topic. So this was work done together with Regan Mendrick, Jason Bowie, and Sherilyn Atkins. And I also did work on World of Warcraft and how we value kind of characters in World of Warcraft. So if we value like how we're using them for displaying, for example, our achievements in games, or if we are using them for communicating with others, or just maybe for exploring like the world, or maybe like most of those, right? I published this work together with Ian Livingston, who works today for Blizzard Interactive, with Carl Goodwin, Regan Mendrick, and myself. And then another paper where we kind of like looked into age-based preferences and player experience. And here we kind of found that with increasing age, preferences shift from performance to completion, joy, and apparently I mentioned performance here again. That is a little mistake. So, but it's more about like completion and joy in play. This was published together with Maximilian Fries and Regan Mendrick. And so you might be wondering, like, why am I talking like about video games, right? So because video games are actually my background, and when I think like, hey, video games, like with the sport games, okay, what's actually going on here? But like the reality in kind of like game design is that there's actually like a lot of things that video games and board games share. There's of course like one huge difference, which is that in board games you're kind of like actually missing the state machine, right? Like the computer is not kind of holding all those variables in their head, so you either have to do it yourself, or you use like little helpers like tokens or like little sliders or whatever it is. But kind of like the core function, the core play function is like very similar, right? So you have a player that is actually interacting with a game. So interacting with a game means like interacting with its procedures, obeying to its rules, and sometimes they are heavily discussed, following the objectives of the game, and also like engaging kind of in the conflict that the game proposes, right? And that results in an outcome. Like, for example, in total frustration when you play Ludo or Sorry, and that has an effect on the player, and then they start interacting the game again. And of course, resources is something that's used in this context. So there's a shared space basically in this entire setup. And just like to give like one little example, and I'm going to use the game King of Tokyo like a couple of times as an example for a board game to kind of go deeper into mechanics as well at the later point. Here, the objective is kind of like what I'm addressing, and all what I'm talking about right now are like formal elements of play, right? So the objective here is gain 20 points or be the last monster standing. If you look into like a digital game, we find in Overwatch, for example, that in a deathmatch, you have like very similar kind of objectives here. So reach 20 points or, be the last fighter standing. So talking about formal elements, the other part is also like dramatic elements that kind of like create the play experience, right? And here we're talking often about challenge, which is something that is actually given in all games, play, premise, characters, the story of the game, dramatic arc, world building. And you might realize that like, in some games, like a lot of like the premise parts or character building or things like that are left. And I think we're going to talk about this like a little bit more. So using formal and dramatic elements, right, you're kind of like have an intent of like an experience that you want to create as a game designer, right? So let's say I want to create like a game that feels, make the player feel, I guess like in this case, in the game that's displayed up there, like motorically a little bit confused, but also challenge of like motor control. And, I want to have like a feeling of competition and challenge in this kind of like motor movement. So this is kind of like my trajectory, right? So competition with like small head movements, and see if I can actually create something that like results in that. So I start creating a prototype. I start evaluating my prototype. I come out like with a first kind of like full design, and I try this. Like the evaluation gives me already like insight in how that might be experienced, and then I kind of like do an iterative design process, like go like basically step by step, like through those steps again until I feel like my design intent is fulfilled. And I think like what is very important here to highlight is, just because I set out and say, hey, I want to create a fun game, that does not mean that I've actually created a fun game, right? So the proof here is in the pudding. And I guess that's where evaluation is very crucial and important. So one framework that helps designers in like creating games is this kind of MDA framework. So we're talking here about mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. And this framework kind of like needs to be looked at from two sides. So one is the game designer side. They usually look like just from the perspective of the mechanics, and the player side, looking at the aesthetics, or you can like replace aesthetics here also like with experiences is often more how this is understood. Right, so mechanics are the constraints the game operates under. So like the formal elements that I introduced before. So the setup, possible actions, game responses, and an end state. So conflict resolution would be like one of those. And then the dynamics, right? So strategies and options that are actually emerging from the mechanics, resulting, not in visual elements here, but also like questions in like, is the game actually fun? How is it fun? Is it frustrating, boring, interesting, kind of connected like to your design intent? And just to kind of like walk a little bit like through the mechanics side, right? So if you take a game like King of Tokyo, then we are looking into kind of the objectives of the game. So reaching 20 points or be the last monster. Then the mechanics, a random dice roll. I'm actually missing here kind of the energy roll, which gives you an energy token. But besides that, you can cause damage. You can heal your monster, or you can collect kind of like collect points. You can be in or outside of Tokyo. There's a mechanic that's called yielding. So once you receive damage, like while being in Tokyo, you can leave Tokyo. And then the cards provide like deeper kind of mechanics. And then there's also a set of rules, right? So I have 3 random rolls. I can't heal inside Tokyo, and I can only yield after I took damage. And then there are the dynamics, right? So like this is kind of like what I would like to see emerge, like from the combination of mechanics and rules. So for example, getting to a point where I see players like balancing point gain and damage, right? So either trying to kind of like destroy all other monsters or destroy the monster in Tokyo, or really focusing on gaining points as quickly as possible. Right, so there are choices to be made like around being inside or outside of Tokyo because of the healing mechanic, right? So like there's a question always like when to be in there and when to go out so that I can actually heal and then get back in. So that comes back like to the kill or gain points question, and then cards actually add like another level of complexity here that I'm not gonna dive into. So all this kind of comes together and creates like experiences, right? So like the experience of competition, of fighting against each other, like about who is like the monster in Tokyo. But there's also, right, like elements of thrill, for example. So barely surviving, which comes from like this trade-off between gaining health and or like gaining points and doing damage, right? So you have to like, you're always operating like kind of on a fine line. Or dominance is like an experience you create here as well, right? Having more life than anyone else and being kind of able to kind of control and stand within Tokyo. And then there's this idea of a race here as well, right? So gaining points quickly. And what's often interesting, like in games that use race, like our race experiences, is lead reversal. So like the tension that comes from someone being in front and then like losing the lead again and then getting back into the lead, and that's something that is used, for example, extensively like in this game. But games like Ludo, of course, use race mechanics like that as well. Yeah, and so there's obviously like a diversity of experiences like out there, right? That we're kind of like games are creating. So coming from kind of a light but also kind of competitive, challenging experience you find in King of Tokyo, to kind of like the more dive into like a role-playing like type like game like Gloomhaven, or really like, you know, coming together with friends and playing games like in motor control or using motor control like Jenga, or games that are heavily based on strategic planning and negotiation like Settlers, or like games like Looping Louie that I think are mostly like actually used as a drinking game today. And then there's also a game like games like Risk, right? Like again, like very strategic, long planning, long time investment going with it. Right. So, and while games are very diverse, like what we actually like is like very diverse as well. So in video game design, like there's Richard Bartle, which is kind of like the person who started to kind of define like the first kind of player typologies, which are roughly divided by, you know, players in the world context and acting and interacting. And then there are 4 quadrants. So players who are acting are defined as killers. So people who are like players acting against other players. Players acting against the world are called achievers, and players or like interacting in the world are explorers, and players just interacting with each other he calls socializers. And that's kind of like the root, at least like in digital games research, of kind of like dividing players. And some of this also holds like in the role-playing context, of course. So the other researcher that kind of like left quite an impact in kind of looking into what motivates players, what actually do players enjoy and what they go for, is Nick Yee, who created like a framework for player motivation. And he did so in World of Warcraft, actually. So he developed in the early like vanilla versions of World of Warcraft smart ways of kind of like collecting player behavior data. And from that, he kind of like built this framework, like looking into the players are motivated by going for achievements, that they're motivated by being social, so socializing with others, casual chatting, relationships, and teamwork. And then also like immersion, discovery, role-playing, customization, escapism. And based on kind of like this player motivation framework, Nikki, as a researcher, at some point stopped and created a company which is called Quantic Foundry. And they do, on this model that I presented before, like extremely large-scale research on player motivation. And they started also to look into motivation models for board games and come up with like basically 4 kind of different categories or clusters is actually what they call them of motivation. So we look into conflict, immersion, strategy, and social fun. And what we're talking here about, right, is like, it's kind of like who likes what, like what is actually like the preference of people. So let's say you're coming into like a board game cafe and you're someone who is really into strategy games, like being able to communicate that and then, you know, be presented like with a selection of strategy games is kind of like the idea here, as one example. And then they're like these clusters are kind of like broken down into, like if you look into conflict, for example, then we find social manipulation, deception, bluffing, persuasion, and negotiation. Looking into immersion, right, we find here aesthetics, so beautiful artwork, components that actually reflect the theme, strategy, systems discovery, so learning new game mechanics. So for example, if you think about something like the Viking chess cup, where people like have to throw, basically a wooden stick after other sticks that are strategically distributed, but you have to learn like how those mechanics actually work. Then the need to win, and then like social fun. And you might realize that like a lot of this already, right? Like it's not just like you have one preference. It's like social fun is the only thing that I want to go for, right? If I would, for example, take an example like Dungeons and Dragons, then you would find that you could create like a very immersive kind of like in-depth, elaborated experience that is like really strongly focused on conflict and social manipulation, or like the group you're playing with really enjoys like strategy play, and that's kind of like the scenarios that you're setting up for them, right? So like if you take those different motivations, you can also kind of like adapt and adjust play and use those basically also as like personas, so ideas you're kind of like designing and going for in your creation process. Just to give a few examples, right? So this is Warhammer 40K, right? So like a game that heavily is based on, or is people who are enjoying strategy and conflict would likely feel like drawn to it. There's of course this aesthetic aspect as well, like in play here, and like immersing yourself kind of like in the lore of the game. And you might find like if you move a little bit around in Warhammer communities, you might find that sometimes you meet players who are like really deep into like the painting aspect of it, but they actually never play. They really like, they just own the armies, they like the lore, but they never kind of engage into play, or very rarely do. Right, then we have like a game like Settlers, for example, where we find strategy and social manipulation. So I bring social manipulation in here, right, because like the negotiation aspect of Settlers is actually quite important and quite strong. And I mentioned I lost this tournament very barely, and it actually boiled down to a very stupid situation where the clock was deciding, or was like almost running out. So my strategy was based on focusing on that the clock runs out like to a certain point in time, like when it actually was suggested to, and then they extended like the time frame after, like very last minute, to give a little bit more time buffer, and that completely ruined my plans because I lost like a negotiation round before. Anyways, and then games like King of Tokyo, where you experience social fun, like conflict is in there as well, and it kind of like divides a little bit like the world of board games. But then, of course, you have games like Dungeons and Dragons, which are heavily based like on around immersion and like investing yourself like into elaborated kind of like lore and engaging with characters immersed in a different world. And I want to talk a little bit about like the idea of like identification and identity, like in gameplay. So from a psychological perspective, like there's a model that's called self-discrepancy, and it kind of like describes that it's important for us to kind of like have a match between like who we are and who we want to be, and also like who society wants us to be is like another aspect in here. But like in gameplay, what's really kind of like what it comes down to is like this idea of that we are allowed in play basically to take other kind of like, basically create other other selves, right? So I can create characters that are fulfilling very much, my ideals, like are something that I myself am not, or I can create characters that are very close to myself. And there's research that kind of like investigates these kind of like closing, basically, discrepancy between yourself and like your representation, and how that affects like enjoyment and how that affects play. So characters like in play, and especially digital games, allow like customization quite well. But of course, like a lot of this actually comes from role-playing games. So way before, where we start to create like this kind of like ideal representations of ourselves, or sometimes, we're just creating ourselves in there. And that leads like to really like deeper engagement, basically, like with the medium. So projecting characteristics that we're fond of, or that we're not fond of, on characters is something that's important for play experience. And just to illustrate this, the impact of this like a little bit, I brought like one example of the permadeath game, or permadeath survival game, Rust. So Rust is a game that basically are dropped into a world. Your character can die once. That's why it's permadeath, and then you like have to create a new one. So you constantly have like this tension of survival. And the makers of Rust Facepunch at one point decided that like character customization is something they didn't want to support anymore. And what they would do is they would just assign like gender and skin color to the characters. And you basically like, when you start the game, you're starting off like as a naked person, like in the middle of nowhere, basically, and then have to like find sticks. And the outrage by the community was really intense, almost like very difficult to follow, like how much went into like this curation process, and having like a character assigned that is not one that is under your control. So this customization process is something that really, really matters to people, and it's quite important, and strongly leveraged in games today, and strongly leveraged like in other areas as well. And something that if you look a little bit like into kind of like modern game design, modern board game design, is something that we very strongly kind of see, right? Like if you go back, like we find chess and like games like backgammon, and of course like card games that are very kind of mechanic focused, and there's not much like to project basically onto. And like if you look into modern games like Gloomhaven or King of Tokyo, or the Fantastic Revenge of the Dictators from Backbook Adventures, we find like that these kind of like projection surfaces in characters is something that's more and more becomes relevant. Yeah, so I'm coming to the end of my talk, and I hope that I could give you kind of like an overview about like the design process of games, or like elements that are drawn from when games are created, like formal and dramatic elements, design frameworks like the MDA framework, and then also like looking a little bit into like individual differences and preferences in gameplay, and then kind of like having a look into how we identify with characters in gameplay and their relevance maybe for modern board game design as well. So thank you very much, and I'm handing it back to Marilyn.
Okay, Max, thank you very much for your presentation. For your information, I'm having a look here at the live stream. We have about 300 viewers currently, YouTube and Facebook, and we have a very lively chat. And I would like to mention to everyone, if you have a question for Max at this point, please feel free to use the chat function as well for asking your questions. And then I'm going to look later and see if we have any online input for that. Max, I was wondering, your research is of course mostly related to games in a more online or video game sense,
yeah,
which is not exactly the same as the board games that we're focusing on tonight. Could you say a bit more about the similarities or the differences that strike you most?
Right, I think like when we look into like the creation process, I think that's like something that I tried at least like to outline, like where there are similarities, like in terms of the procedures, for example, that are used like in board games and also like in video games, or like the rule sets that we're using. However, like I think one big difference is kind of like the speed and the dynamic of like what you can actually create in online games, while in board games you have to kind of keep track of the state, right? So you need to have very quick mechanics to kind of simulate the experience that you can create online, like in some cases, or have more like a kind of like kind of time-based gameplay. But the other part, right, is like when we look into like board games, is actually kind of the awareness of the state of the game. So like there's a lot of kind of like hidden things that can happen like in online gameplay, but in board games it's really like all out in the open. You see how people manipulate stones, and you have to kind of keep track a little bit of like who moves their token like a little bit too far. So like cheating detection is a very social process actually that we train and teach our children in early. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And I was wondering, I was going to say in Dutch we have this expression, but it's actually Latin. But I think we use it in Dutch sometimes, called homo ludens. It was coined by a Dutch sociologist, Johan Huizinga, which kind of translates as the playing human. And he emphasizes that playing, just the act of playing, is an important part of being human, not only when you're a child, but also when you're an adult. Mm-hmm. Do you see that translated in our enthusiasm for either board games or online games? Or
absolutely, yeah. I think, right, so there are multiple sides of this. Like one is kind of like the learning path of like exploring in gameplay, right? So like the idea here is of like trying things out as a child and trying like to explore basically like how the world works. And we find this in board game play, but we also find this in digital play, right? So how we are learning basically of becoming and interacting like as adults, right? So like if I come back to digital games here, like for a moment again, right? Because a lot of the technology and software like used in there is something that we're actually using today, like for example in this environment, right? So I've been socialized like in using digital environment and digital chats like this actually like through digital gameplay. But then, right, if we are asking like the question of like how as adults we're still eager kind of like to learn and play with each other and be social and explore, I think, different lores. And I think what's interesting there though is like that I think the competition part shifts and changes a little bit. At least like that's kind of what we find in and like we find in research on digital games. But one of the big differences, I guess, is always the right, like this research, it shows tendencies. It shows not like individuals and how they feel. So you will find very, very competitive 50-year-olds for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, see, we have a few questions coming in the chat. One is, what makes Dungeons and Dragons more a board game than not a board game? If I interpret this question correctly. Does that ring a bell to you? Is it not completely clear whether this is a board game or not? Dungeons and Dragons, do you know?
I guess because I would say like the game state is held like on a board, right? So or you can at least hold it on a board. Like I guess there are groups that are playing like boardless as well. But in general, I guess like in terms like the endlessness of kind of like the objective, I guess is like a huge difference, right, that you find in there. Like, so
maybe you can just very briefly describe for the viewers who don't know Dungeons and Dragons what it is that makes it slightly different than your traditional board game.
Right. So it's a role-playing game, right, where everyone kind of like creates a character. You set up like a scenario that your group is kind of working towards or finishing off. Like, I don't know, like it might be a monster, it might be like freeing a village, like it might be a number of things that that are interesting. But you're sitting around basically with your friends and walking through this kind of like fantasy that the master, like in this, the game master in this situation, kind of creates, right? So you're using usually like a board to kind of like hold the state of the game, so where the characters are when you're entering a dungeon. But the big difference is, I think, like the finite state like of these scenarios, right? That can go over multiple weeks. While if you like play a game like chess, for example, like the objective and the finite state is very clear, so it's far more open. I guess from a research perspective, we would also look here kind of like in the more like playful or rule-based, objective-focused kind of like play types, and then role-playing games are more like on the free play side, like to a large degree. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Let me see what question to pick next. This is a very broad one, but perhaps an interesting one. Are there any large unanswered questions in the field of game design? Maybe you can pick one that's a particular challenge to you.
Yes, I think that especially like in in video game design, but also like in board game design, I think we're starting to are able to kind of like study on a larger scale and not just on an individual scale how people experience and play games, and kind of like what mechanics trigger what kind of like emotions or feelings or like that kind of like relation. So the question of really understanding how mechanics in games are affecting our experiences is something that we kind of start understanding. Yeah.
And do you see, because I think there's really been some progress in game development when you compare it to, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. So sort of startling maybe the Settlers of Catan leading up to the very advanced games that you have now. Yeah. Where do you think it will go? How far can we take it, basically?
How far can we take like development of
board games? Yeah, but
I think like the mixed board game space is interesting, right? Like mixing digital and physical board games.
Okay.
But on the other hand, I think actually like the more intriguing part is the the materiality like of play, right? Like there might be changes like in the materials that we are using, like sustainability in this context might be something that's of interest. There's also, I guess, right, it's like when it comes to game mechanics, I'm interested like in digital and in the board game space as well. Like what are new mechanics going to be? Like when we're stop theming something that already has happened in the digital environment, that would obviously be something like the next Assassin's Creed. There goes a lot of work in there and there are changes, but it's a lot of like the similar or same mechanics that are actually coming together there. So the question then is, right, like how far, like what are actually like creative, innovative, new ideas that are that we find in play. Yeah.
You mentioned also, because we've discussed this before a little bit, and you mentioned that often that you see that advances in technology are kind of tied to advances in games. I don't know if that's board games or online games.
Yeah, there's.
Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if we kind of like go back like to Doom, for example, and like raycasting, like in Doom is like one technology in computation and graphics. That's something that like it was driven by being able to like represent kind of like lighting like within the game context really, but it's something that, right, if you follow like follow that kind of like development through until today, like these kind of technological advancements we always find like in the context of games, because of the need. I think it's a big part of it is because of the need that we want to kind of like display fantastical worlds in beautiful colors, kind of in an interactive way, right? And then the question is, right, where do we find these kind of environments like outside of this? Is movies, I guess, is like a big driver as well. But then often like the challenge of doing this interactively, so being actually able to be computationally fast enough to display like these great complex, like lighting patterns are always a good example because it's computationally so difficult to so challenging to illuminate a room. Yeah.
And probably a lot of the features that we're using today, because of the Corona situation, are somehow derived from gaming as well, right?
Yeah, I guess if you look like into spaces like, I guess like social spaces, especially, would be something where you find like a lot of that actually like comes out of gaming culture. So if you look into things like Discord, for example, that are used for creating social spaces, like it's something that we're doing actively, like industrial design right now as well. Then, you know, this comes from using TeamSpeak, for example, very early on to connect teams and coordinate teams in play, or like large-scale World of Warcraft servers that are connecting and communicating with each other in little sub-teams like in there that are doing raids together. And I think a lot of this, like when I look now into like educational channels or look into my like the Slack that I'm operating, I'm reminded of like IRC technology that was heavily used like in gameplay as well. So there's always like a strong connection to these kind of technologies to organize groups and be in groups and play. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, it all ties together more and more these days, is the sentiment I have. Okay, Max, thank you very much for now. We might be seeing you back after our next talk for some joint questions. But I'm giving to you a very warm welcome, a very warm applause, all by myself. But thank you very much for now for joining us.
Thank you very much, Malika.
We move on to our next speaker. who is Bart Latten. He is and co-owner of the Dutch board game developing company called Black Box Adventures. They have about 5 games now that they've created, and Bart is going to be talking with us about what it means to be designing a game, how to put it on the market, how to come up with ideas and develop them further. So Bart, thank you for being with us tonight. I see you're already in the live stream. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm also good, thanks. I'm also going to ask you the question, what is your favorite game? And I'm very curious to see if you will pick one of your own, of course.
No. I think it is one of the games I still play, and I've been playing for a long time. It's called Magic the Gathering.
Right.
So it's actually a card game, and it's new sets are developed every time. So there's always something new. So it's a good game.
I think you have a lot of fellow fans in the chat as well, have I noticed. Okay, thanks. Bart, we have some Mentimeter questions before we start with your conversation that kind of tie to your presentation as well. So it's back to the audience for a few more Mentimeter questions. You can use the same link and the same code for the questions part 2. And I'm just going to project the first question. I know we have a little bit of a delay in the live stream, so I'm going to take a bit more time. But the first question is, I prefer games that depend on luck, strategy, general knowledge, or cooperation. If you have to choose one of those. And I know that the more hardcore board game fans are often not a big fan of luck, which is also what we're seeing. And for general knowledge, I imagine games like Trivial Pursuit, maybe 30 seconds. Okay. So many people are interested mostly in strategy games. Is this what you would expect, Bart?
Well, it totally depends on the audience, of course. So, but I mean, there is a lot of people that are interested in strategy games. I would think there was more equal. So
yeah, this is quite a winner. Yeah. Okay, we move on to the next question. How would you describe your play style? Would you say you're quite a competitive person? Are you mostly playing for fun? Do you take it very seriously, or are you actually a bit of a cheat? You can answer anonymously tonight, so feel free to be as honest as you like. Okay, quite some competitive people there. Two people who are honest enough to admit that they sometimes may cheat a little bit. How would you describe Bart?
I think it depends on the game. I would say I'm pretty competitive, but some games are just for fun, and some other people might say that I'm a bit of a cheat, but that's because I win a lot of the games. So.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think most of the people have voted, and most of you are pretty competitive, but you're also playing for fun. Okay. Now we have one final question. This is again an open question, maybe a difficult one, but if you were to create your own game, what would it be about? And just to give some very old school examples, ones that I really like myself, could be about Bigfoot, could be about slime, animals. What topic would intrigue you? Okay, we have fantasy cats. Cats is a good one. Something like 30 seconds. Okay. Bears. Okay, we have a fruit lover. Like Sushi Go, but then for fruit or something. Okay, licking feet. Particular. Dominance, okay. But we do have a very creative crowd tonight, so I applaud you for that. Being an evil overlord. Okay. More pairs. Any others coming in? Okay, I see some more magic. Strategy in a different world. Okay. Here we go. The VVD. Oh, political game might not be a bad idea. Birds. Okay, oh, there's so many more. Wow. Psychology, mushrooms. Big fat. No, that's no. And music. Okay, well. Bart, if you're in need of inspiration, I will send you the results later. But for now, that's it for the Mentimeter.
I'm intrigued by the pairs, so I will think about that.
Yeah, me too. Maybe that person can comment in the chat with a further clarification.
Please.
That would be great. Then we will get back to it. For now, Bart, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your experiences with designing your own games.
Thank you. All right, my name is Bart Latten. Thank you, Studium Generale, for inviting me, and also the Knights of the Kitchen Table for inviting me. I will talk a little bit about the board game industry. But first, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit more. Perhaps some of you will be wondering why I've displayed the board game Operation. In Dutch, it's called Dr. Bibber. And it's because from a profession, I'm a medical doctor. And after I did my medicine study in Maastricht, I specialized as a pathologist and later in forensic medicine and forensic pathology. And some of you might recognize the sword, which is a sword of 1,000 truths. It's from the World of Warcraft episode of South Park. But besides my professional ambitions, I've always been a tabletop game enthusiast. And some of you might recognize this revolutionary storage shelving system by a not-to-be-named Swedish company. And at the top of my shelf, there are these 3 games that also got me into the hobby, which is Magic the Gathering, like I already mentioned before. I've started with this edition, Portal. Also Warhammer Fantasy, and Dungeons and Dragons. But like a lot of you that fancy board games or card games, the shelf becomes fuller and fuller. At first, in my case, with more card games, and then more interesting games, more tactical games. And at the end, the shelf is full and you need another shelf. And that's how the hobby gets started. So one could say during the day I work as one of the few forensic pathologists in the Dutch Forensic Institute in The Hague. And during the night and in the weekends and on the holidays, I'm active as a tabletop game developer and publisher. With our company, Black Box Adventures. So our company, Black Box Adventures, was founded by Bas, Bart and Alina in 2015. And it was founded because Alina, my then girlfriend, now wife, was studying international business at the Maastricht University with a double master in entrepreneurship and strategic marketing. And for her entrepreneurship master, she had to found a company. And because Bas and Bart and me were already playing a lot of games, and Bas had thought of his own game, we decided to try to publish that game together and then start our company. So when we look at the new releases every year, we can see that it's really exploding in these last few years. So these are only the new releases of board games, so they exclude card games and also card games like Magic the Gathering, which is really growing every year. But before this timeline, before 1944, of course, there were a lot of other games as well. Many card games, dice games, but also games like chess. And a game like Monopoly, like most people have at home, and there were also a few enthusiasts in the Mentimeter. This game was also from before this timeline. Monopoly was published in 1935, so it's really an old game. But it's still popular because every year they make a new version of Monopoly. When we're looking at the total market size when it comes to money, we can also see that the board game industry has a lot of growth and a lot of potential in the next coming years. And of course, these are just numbers. And although I would expect the students and alumni from TU Eindhoven to know their numbers, if you really want to experience the immense size of this industry, I would recommend you to visit Spiel. And Spiel is one of the big one of the big board game fairs in the world. It's just across the border in Germany, in Essen. And last year, in 2019, there were 209,000 visitors. So that's really, really a lot. And this year, unfortunately, for the first time, it will be digital because of the COVID pandemic. So it should be interesting, but it's also nice to go there and really experience this really big fair. So what do you do when you have a great idea for a game? The first thing I would say is go and playtest your game, and then go and playtest some more, and then go and playtest some more as well. And then when you have playtested it a lot of times, you will probably go back to the drawing board, readjust your whole game because rules have changed and you had a lot of feedback, and then you go playtesting again, followed by more playtesting, and again changing your game, followed by playtesting. And finally, when you have something you like, you've playtested that. So when you have this game that is really awesome and everybody likes, not only you, but also the people you've playtested with, and not only your family and friends, but also people you don't know, then in my opinion, there are three big roads you can walk. So the first one is you can go to a big publisher. And the big publishers have been around for decades, and they have a really strong distribution network. So big publishers have a lot of connections with distributors. The distributors give the games to the shops or sell the game to the shops, and then the customers can buy the games at the shops. The problem with the big publishers is that a lot of people go with their idea to a big publisher. And if this is your first idea, you really have to have a very good game before you get their interest. Then if you have their interests, probably your game will be published in the next few years because they already have their releases planned for the next few years. And a lot of times you also have to give them a lot of rights. So the game you present them might not be the same game that will be published because they can change theme and they can also change mechanics. So another option you have is to go to smaller publishers. So I would consider ourselves as a small publisher. So smaller publishers, they can also sell to distributors, they can also sell to shops, and they can also sell to customers. It depends on the game, it depends on the publisher. And when we work with a designer of games, we like to work together with the designer. So we would like to have the designer involved in further developing the game, so we're all confident with the game we're actually publishing. And then there is one other option, which is a crowdfunding website. So the crowdfunding for board games is usually located on the Kickstarter. And how crowdfunding works is as follows. You have a great idea. It can be a board game. It can be a new music album. It can be something technical stuff. And you want to pitch that game on Kickstarter to other people on the platform. And if they are interested in your project, they can give you money to produce the project. But you will only get the money if you have enough. And how much you need, you can decide yourself. So you set the goal. And then afterwards, when you have enough money, you can produce your product. But most of the time, these people want something in return. So if you go on Kickstarter to produce a board game, most of the people that give you money want a board game in return. So it's a kind of a pre-sale, but not completely, because the people that give you the money to produce it don't have any rights. So if you're a not very nice person, you go to Kickstarter, you get a lot of money, and then you just keep the money and never give the people a game. And that's why when you walk this route, it's also very important to get the trust of the people that would like to give you the money to produce the game. And trust is earned by doing other projects or by doing a lot of marketing. So if you have a successful Kickstarter, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Think about manufacturing, think about a pledge manager, fulfillment, customer service. So it takes a lot of time. And we also see that some people that have a successful Kickstarter will not ever produce the game because they didn't think of these things. When you look at the Kickstarter platform in total, we can see that a number of projects that are funded, so that are successful, are growing in the last few years. And so the projects that are not funded are less than the projects that are funded. So this could give you the idea it's becoming easier and easier to get your project funded on Kickstarter. On the other hand, there are more and more games, so there's a lot more competition. And like I said before, trust is very important. So if you now go to Kickstarter and you have your first game, it's more difficult to get the people on your side than if you already have kickstarted a few other games. There are many websites that can give you ideas on how to build your project page, what you should think about. For example, you should launch your game on Tuesday, but then the next question is, what time do you launch your game? Because there's a time difference between Europe and the US, which are the biggest markets for Kickstarter. So there are a lot of websites that can help you with that, but it's not a guarantee for a success. So experience helps. And this year we did our most successful Kickstarter for our newest game, Adventures in Neverland. It was, for us, it was very successful, but also this campaign is considered to be the most successful Kickstarter for board games in terms of total sum across the Benelux. So for Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. I will talk a little bit more about this game later. But of course, we couldn't do all of this without our volunteers. And we are very lucky and grateful for these wonderful people that support us in every fair and also with every project. And in the end, board games is not only about business, it's also about people coming together. It's the social aspect of it that I really like. So I'm really grateful for all these people that help us. When we look at some of our games, I've tried to use the stuff Max already talked about. And this was our first game, Revenge of the Dictators. For this game, we did everything ourselves. So we also did the shipping of the game, which was a lot of work. And Revenge of the Dictators is really a game about conflict, about backstabbing each other. And it has a lot of luck. So we tried to show people this by also, like you see below the title, Revenge of the Dictators, lose your friends and rule the world. But also the blurb that was in Kickstarter, an overly competitive rat race. So we tried to convey that this is really a game about conflict. Because we don't want everybody to buy our game. We want people that like our games to buy the game. And I think we've learned a lot of this because we probably did not do this enough. Because you look at the rating on Board Game Geek, which is a website with a lot of information about board games, you can see that there are a lot of people that really like it, there are a lot of people that really don't like it, and then you have the middle part. So what we learned from this is that we should do better marketing and to sell a game to people that would enjoy this game. This game included a lot of dictators. So basically, dictators are on holiday in Hawaii. They're a little bit bored and they want to take over the United States of America. So you have a lot of different characters. And some people really like the theme of dictators. They want to play with a character called Adolf the Hipster. But some people really don't like it. They think you can't do a game with dictators. So identification with the character can be a strength or a weakness. But we tried to make this our strength by, on Kickstarter, adding more pledge levels. So people that wanted to support our game could get their own character in the game. So we would make a drawing, a special ability, and they would get their own character in the game. And that was very successful for this game. So we've learned a lot. We used some space of my parents' house to store all the games before we shipped them. But it was a very nice project, and we learned a lot of it. And then we moved on to some more strategic games, more abstract games. And abstract games don't really need a theme. So think about backgammon or maybe chess. You don't need a theme to play this game. But I think a theme can help to explain the game mechanics a little bit more. So this game, Frutti di Mare, is about a plate of spaghetti, as you can see at the bottom. And on this plate of spaghetti, you have different seafood armies that try to compete for the middle of the plate. Because when you reach the middle, you're the king of the plate. And all these seafood pawns have their own special abilities, their strength, their weakness. Some have a special ability, speed. So it's basically a war game with a family-friendly exterior. So when we look, for example, at the salmon, a salmon in real life can jump. So the salmon in our game can also jump. All the other pawns are not able to jump. So this way you can use the theme to help explain the mechanics. The oily octopus has tentacles, so he can kind of reach further and has a ranged attack. And then the fugu is a very deadly fish, very poisonous, so when you attack it, you have a chance of dying yourself. The next game was Itchy Monkey, also an abstract game. And this game is about lice that are on monkeys and want to populate other monkeys. So what do lice do in real life? They spawn and then they move. So they can jump, or the monkey can move and they can jump to the next monkey. So we tried to use a theme to explain the mechanics. And this is a very strategic game, but it's also very accessible because it's pretty easy. You have only two things to do: spawn and move. So easy to learn, hard to master, but also a lot of conflict in this game. Then the game we did this year, Adventures in Neverland, is a completely different game. It's a lot about immersing yourself into the world of Neverland. And the aesthetics are very important. There's beautiful artwork, there's miniatures. And that brings us to a topic about game design. So do you start designing a game with a theme, or do you start designing a game with the mechanics? And both can work. But in this case, the game was started with the theme. The designer of this game, Vicky Swers, was really into role-playing games and also into the world of Peter Pan and Captain Hook, so basically Neverland. So when she wanted to combine the both, there wasn't a game that suited her needs. So she wanted to design her own game. And this is what now is Adventures in Neverland. So she started with the theme, and then she added mechanics to the theme to make it work. So she used mechanics of role-playing games, for example. But the other way also works, of course. And identification is also very important in this game. And this game makes it a little bit more easy because of the theme. All people probably know Peter Pan and Captain Hook, so you don't need to explain the theme. Everybody knows it. So it's easier to identify yourself with one of the main characters. As this has a lot of elements of a role-playing game, everybody also has their own game board. As you can see on the right, you have different game boards with different characteristics and special abilities. And when you level up, you can choose a new special ability. So you can build your character as you play this game and as you explore the islands. You can gain items, you can gain allies. So you can put something of yourself into your character in this game. And then when you do your Kickstarter, there's always something that comes up. We'd like to call this the case of the mermaid nipple. Because when we showed this artwork on the Kickstarter, some people were annoyed by the nipple that was showing. It's not really a nipple, but it can imply a nipple. So we had to change the artwork. And I guess you don't really miss it if it's not there. So that's why we change it. But every time there's always something that you didn't think of. So every project you do, you get more experience. This is another upcoming game, which is also completely different because this is a cooperative game. And I think cooperative games have also been gaining more attention lately. There is a cooperative game that is now very active, I would say, a game called Pandemic. We're now in a pandemic. And in Pandemic, you also have to work together against the game because you have to cure the pandemic. Climate Oasis also has this, so you have to work together to work against the game. And the theme is set in a post-climate change world. So not post-apocalypse, but post-climate change in the year 2070. Although we're thinking of reducing it to 2040, seeing what's happening in the world now. And in this game, you have to start building a new sustainable society while evading environmental and corporate threats. But there is a problem because of COVID-19, because we cannot playtest this game as much as we want to. So we're looking for different options. And one of the options is digitalizing the game. So something like Tabletop Simulator, but also Tabletopia is another platform. So when you digitalize the game, you're able to play it with other friends that are not in the same room. And you are able to play a board game, but it's a little bit different from sitting next to each other in the same room. And like also mentioned before, you have now more games that use an app to help with the game. So you don't need to do a lot of thinking during playing. The app does it for you. So you have a combination, a hybrid of a tabletop game and also a digital game. But not only games are getting digitalized, also Kickstarter is thinking a little bit more about environmental commitments, because every board game that gets produced uses a lot of resources. So Kickstarter tries to let creators think about the environmental pressure they put when they are creating their product. So for the game Climate Oasis, because it's also about the environment, we try to think of this a little bit more. So if you look at the world and the biggest markets for tabletop games, where they are located, then the biggest markets are located in France, UK, Germany, the US, and Canada. But most games are actually produced in China, which means all the games that are produced, thousands and thousands of games, need to be shipped to Europe and to the US. So for this game, we're thinking, well, maybe it's possible to manufacture the games in as well as the US, as well as in Europe, so you don't need to ship, which might be better for the environment. You also need to think about using different materials. So, for example, you can use wood, like these wooden meeples from Carcassonne, but you can also use plastic meeples. And for this game, we don't want to use any plastics at all. However, most games come with a shrink wrap, which is also plastic. So there are different solutions now being developed to don't use the shrink wrap anymore, but use paper instead. Also, you can think about recycled materials, but that's also, of course, dependent on the manufacturer. And really, the board game industry is a really large business, so you can talk about this for a whole day. I only have 20 minutes, so I will stop here. I'm really interested in seeing what will happen in the board game industry in the upcoming years, and hopefully we can be a part of that. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would welcome any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Bart, thank you very much. There was a lot of response in the chat as well to the things you were saying, in between the many pairs that people sent. But it's good to mention that some of the games that you discussed are also present in the cupboard of the Knights. So if you would like to play that game, get in touch. And people were also surprised to learn that Revenge of the Dictator is actually a Dutch game. So I take that's a compliment to you, Bart. I was wondering, I can imagine that because there are so many offers on the market, basically, it sometimes might be difficult to be original. How do you keep track of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are thousands of new releases every year. So sometimes you see that a topic is very popular. So what we try to do with our games is to pick a topic that is really quirky. Nobody made a game about lies and monkeys. Nobody made a game about seafood battling on a plate of spaghetti. But there are some topics that are very popular. Climate change is not a topic that's very popular, although it's happening right now. So I think we will see more games about climate change, and maybe also about pandemic in the next few years. But I mean, you never know. Yeah.
And are you also thinking, because you mentioned that you include climate considerations in the development of your game, could online games also be a solution in this respect, or?
Yeah, well, they could be a solution, but I think that takes away about the social interactions of a board game. So I'm happy to use it for playtesting, but I wouldn't want to trade it for really sitting together in the same room and play a nice board game.
Yeah. I think I have to agree. Yeah. There are also people saying in the chat, anyone these days can make a board game. And this was in the part where you were talking about the Kickstarter bits. Would you agree with that?
Well, anybody can make a board game, but if it will be published, that's the next question. So you can make a board game, and you can also go to Kickstarter and put a project on the Kickstarter. But it's I think what people are demanding, what backers are demanding of a campaign is more and more. So it's not that easy to create a game and just put it on there and expect it to be funded. You need to do a lot of work to get it funded.
Right. So the start is easy, but the finish maybe not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the start is easy. Yeah. Okay, the start is easy. Yeah.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah.
There are also.
But I would. I mean, anybody can make a board game. So if you have a nice idea, just work on it and show it to your friends and family, play test it, and who knows what will happen.
Exactly. Okay. There are also some questions about expansions and how they relate to the original game. Do you think expansions are a good idea? Is it something you're working on yourself?
I think expansions are, well, it depends on what view. So from a company kind of view, expansions are good because they keep the attention to your game. So people are also still buying the original game. But expansions only make sense if the game is popular. Otherwise, you shouldn't make an expansion, I think. But expansions now are also used on Kickstarter. So, for example, you have the base game on Kickstarter. It has a big campaign. It's successful. If you then make an expansion, you can go on Kickstarter again, because Kickstarter only allows new products. So you cannot go on Kickstarter again with the original idea. So when you make an expansion, you can go on Kickstarter again and then also sell the basic game. So from a financial point of view for designers and publishers, I think expansions are interesting.
Some commercial benefits, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's a little bit hard to keep track of questions among the chatter in the chat, but that's okay. Let's see. There are some people who would like to know your opinion about a certain game. And I'm going to select this person because he said serious question at the beginning. Okay. So we have to take that into consideration. What is your opinion on the game? And then they don't mean the card game, but the mimetic one, the mimetic. I don't know what that word means. Do you know that game called The Game?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, then, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer that question. Are there any future adaptations to the classic board game design that you would like or expect to see?
Could you repeat the question again?
If there are any future adaptations to the classic board game design that you would like or expect to see?
So to classic board games, then?
I think your interpretation of what would be a classic board game design. And what kind of adaptations you expect in the near future, basically? Yeah,
well, when you look at Monopoly, which is a really old game, every year there's a new version, but what actually really changes is a theme. Well, people will buy it, but it's just a theme that changes. It's not really something interesting, something new. I think when you look at the current games and games from 10 or 20 years ago, then the mechanics are different, and I think the games are getting better and better. Also, when you look at the top 10 board games all time on Board Game Geek, most of them are newer games. So I think games are getting better. Sorry?
You mentioned Euro games, or?
No, Board Game Geek. It's a website. Yeah. So, and on this website you have a lot of information about games, also rankings, and I think in the top 10 most of them are newer games. So I think games are getting better every year, probably.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can also bring in Max again, if he's still there, to see if there are some questions for the both of you. Hi, Max.
Hi.
There you are again. I was just wondering, because Max, you mentioned that there might be a future in more hybrid games that are both online and offline. And Bart, is that something that you're also interested in developing, perhaps?
Yeah, well, so you have some board games that use an app. So, for example, you have a game called Mansions of Madness. You have the original version, which you had to do a lot of. You had to have a dungeon master or a game master, basically, that had to move the monsters around. And in the new version, you have an app that does it for you. So The good thing is you can now play together. You don't need a game master, so you're all together versus the board game. And you don't need to think because the app thinks for you. And I think in some games that's really really nice, more streamlining the game, more playing instead of thinking. And another good example is, I think, Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven originally doesn't have an app, but there were some people that made an app, and maybe now it's an official app. And I think it's easier to play with the app than without the app. So if you want to make more complex board games, then an app is a good solution, I think.
Okay.
I think that's really kind of interesting, like the process of kind of like streamlining the parts that are too complex sometimes to like pick up the game, that are really, I don't know, right? Like sometimes you like open the box, it's really beautiful and it's fun to kind of like start unpacking it all, but then you're like 2 hours in and you still don't make any progress, and until everyone has kind of like figured out what the rule set is, and you're like through the debate, it's like, oh, the evening is over.
That does sound familiar sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and that might be like, right, the point where technology, like you described, like really helps. But I guess the other side of this is like being really careful, like in this board game space, also like with the introduction of technology, right? Like the material, like having something in your hand sitting together is something that is really what makes the board game culture. Like I'm wondering like that there's no outcry almost of like the suggestion of like bringing digital and board games like closer and together, right? Like, which is I think something that has been discussed for a while now, but yeah. I guess I'm wondering like where you see like really good use basically of technology, like where that could start, right? In a time like that right now, like should we play, I don't know, a game like Settlers Over Distance using a camera? Is that like how it could look like? Or
are there any real examples yet of the kind of hybrid games that you were discussing, or do they still have to come?
I think like what Bart described is basically like are those games, right? Like there are those type of like hybrid games right now, I guess.
So now there are games being developed that really from the start use an app. But before there were games that also were complex, so people created a website for it. For example, Tales of Arabian Nights is also a kind of choose your adventure kind of game. So when you choose your option, you need to go through a book, see what happens, and then go to another book, see what happens. And it's much easier if you use a website that somebody made for it. It's not from the original designers, but it's much easier. So I think that was kind of the start, and now games are being published that actually need an app to play.
Yeah.
Okay, and how do you? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wonder, like, if VR is gonna like a thing in there, right? It's like at one point, if you like, or push this like one further, and like looking into are we merging board games and VR play? Is that gonna be a thing?
Maybe you can already use it in Tabletop Simulator. I'm not sure. But maybe there is. I don't know. But yeah. I mean, maybe it's an option, but I think it also depends on the quality of VR. Because I also want to interact with people when I'm playing a game. So, yeah.
Yeah,
so
I think I'm really quick to that. Yeah.
You both come from different backgrounds. Do you think you could work on a game together? Could you use your different knowledge to your advantage? And is it something you're interested in?
I'm very interested in his knowledge. I mean, we're just doing it. We're not really thinking about it. So I've learned a lot this presentation, and I'm really interested in using that in game design. Yes.
And I'm super interested to actually getting closer to like doing the real thing, right, as it feels for me, and not like the.
Yeah.
So yes, I think there's lots of space to actually work together, which would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Like in topics like sustainability is also something, right? We briefly addressed this. Like, would be very interesting from an industrial design process perspective. Also, like to work there potentially together in like materiality or something like that. It'd be great.
Yeah. Because in that sense, Bart, your range of topics is very broad, from Revenge of the Dictators to climate awareness, basically. Is that a deliberate choice? There's also someone asking in chat. How do you decide on a new game or a new design? How do you choose what type of game you will go for, and I guess also what kind of topic?
I think, you have some publishers that kind of make the same game. So when you go to the publisher, you know what kind of game you get, and I think that would be a good idea, but we haven't done that. So we when people come to us with their ideas for games, we try to play them, and it's more of a personal touch. I think when we like the idea, when we like the game, when we want to invest our time in it as well, then we will go ahead. So it's not like you need this and this and this, so we can do it. So it's more more of a hunch, I guess, which is probably not the best idea for a company, but still.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people work intuitively, right? Which is what you're doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. I think because of the time, we're going to end the discussion here. So I would like to thank you both again very much for being with us tonight in the live stream and sharing your insights about what it means to create a game and what you have to keep in mind. So thanks again. For me and everyone at home, there's a lot of digital clapping. And then
I hear it roaring.
Yeah, in your mind it's going crazy, right? Okay, then I would like to introduce again Tim Heiswolf of the Knights. There you are, Tim.
Hello, yes, indeed.
You're
also
going
nice
to
presentation, yes.
Lovely. You're going to be talking a little bit about what we're going to do after this event, so go ahead.
Yes, indeed. So we're now going to play some board games. It's optional, but of course we prefer to all see you here. We've got a couple of board games. You can join us on Discord. You don't need an account for that, but we're going to be mostly playing with boardgamearena.com. So if you haven't made an account for that site yet, please do now during my very quick pitches. So now I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the games that we're going to play tonight. Well, first of all, and likely the most popular is going to be Secret Hitler. It's 1930s in Germany, and you're either a fascist or a Democrat or a liberal or whatever you call it. And of course, the fascists want to make sure that Hitler gets into power and can do all these things. And the liberals will try to make sure that that doesn't happen and that Germany stays democratic and blah, blah, blah. It's an interesting game because there are secret roles. The fascists know who everybody else is, but the liberals don't. And in that way, you get a kind of interesting play between the higher number of liberals, but the fewer number of fascists with more coordination between them. And so it's a very fun party game. Then something more intense, I've also got it here behind me, is called Cold Express. It's a very nice game. It's the cowboy era. You're a robber. You're going to rob a train, but you ran out of your luck because at the same time, 4 other people are also robbing the train. So besides robbing the train, you're also going to rob each other. So this is also a very fun game. It's mostly a bit about programming your moves and then executing them. It's a bit more competitive than the most board games. And then finally, something different. It's called Dice Forge. And have you ever wanted to roll your dice and then just have it always be a 6? Well, in this game you can make it be so, because in this game it's all about manipulating your dice, resource management, and thus making sure you're going to be the best. It's also a very nice game. We've also got a few others. We've got Love Letter, Potion Explosion, Honeybee. You can all learn about this more at our Discord, which you can find at sg.kotkt.nl. And if you are unable to play with us tonight or don't want to play with us tonight, of course, I hope you do. You can also join one of our physical board game evenings with that link there. So now I hope to see you all in the Discord in a few minutes. Remember, after this, there's going to be a link where you can enter your, if you want your use point. So thank you, and don't forget to go to sg.kotkt.nl.
Okay, thank you, Tim. There was also one question for you in the chat that I would like to ask you, and that was how you can become a member of the Knights and whether you need
Marla,
to be
I believe you're on mute, or I can hear you at least.
Okay, maybe our technician can fix that? I don't think I am, but are you still not hearing me? Okay, I'll just keep on talking because I hope I will be audible in the live stream. Maybe someone can give me a quick sign about that. Okay, here I am audible, so unfortunately not to you, Tim. I'm sorry. But I think who is also a member of the Knights can answer in the chat how you can become.
Yes,
I
can hear you now again.
Okay. I think we can wrap it up, Tim. The question was how you can become a member of the Knights and whether you have to be a student.
No, it's very easy. You can just come past us on the website. There's also the same link that you can see here on the slide. And you can join one of our activities. And if you like it, you don't have to become a member immediately. Then you can become a member. You don't have to be a student. The board can make exceptions if they want.
Okay, and otherwise go to Discord and ask your questions there. I'm sure they will be answered.
Indeed.
I have a few practical announcements. If you would like to register for use tonight, then the link will appear shortly in the chat or in the comment section on Facebook. And if you would like to join the Knights for a physical event, they will provide a form. Studium Generale is back next week. On Wednesday, we have an online lunch lecture from TOE Professor Peter Baltus about microelectronics. And on Thursday, we still have an actual offline event in the Luna Room. It's a theater performance called Vanta Black about the world's first designer baby. And there's still a few places left for that. Everyone, head over now to Discord to join us for some online games. And then on behalf of both Tim and me, thank you all very much for the lively discussion in the chat and for your attention and participation tonight. And we hope you have enjoyed it. Bye.